Hello, everyone. I'm Mnar Adley for Mint Press News. Iran has been in the crosshairs of both Western media, the US government, and Israel as demonstrations have spread across the country against rising prices that have been hijacked by pro-monarchy rioters calling on the US and Israel for regime change. But those protests have calmed down. But if you watch corporate media, you'll hear the same old framing that is used to manufacture consent for war, including describing the Islamic Republic as a regime who is mowing down peaceful activists in their tens of thousands, with outlets from the Times to the New York Post citing bogus claims of 17,000 dead protesters and describing it as a genocide, a term they refused to use when reporting on the actual Israeli genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. We have to remember, Western media accepts death tolls about Iran at face value, and Palestinian deaths in Gaza remain endlessly questioned, revealing how belief follows a powerful agenda, not evidence. But also, we trace these inflated numbers of 17,000 deaths and 30,000 mass arrests, these bogus claims, to one source, the human rights activists in Iran, which is not even based in Iran. It's based in Fairfax, Virginia, and it's funded by the CIA cutout, the National Endowment for Democracy. And human rights activists in Iran is part of a pro-democracy NGO pipeline that's being backed by the CIA to feed Western press with inflated figures and false information about Iran to signal boost a pro-regime change narrative to not only manufacture consent for another war, but to manipulate the Iranian diaspora. And to top it all off, of course, former CIA Director Mike Pompeo has openly stated that Mossad agents have led these riots, and Israeli media and military analysts are openly boasting about the success of their operation. But I want to remind you, it's been a few weeks where these protests and these riots have actually stopped. They've ended, but media is still playing with this line. So the question arises, was this a revolution like the media would like us to believe, or another regime change operation? Joining me from Tehran is a returning guest, Syed Mohammad Marandi. Dr. Marandi is a professor of English literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran. Welcome to the show, Doctor.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure being on your show.
Of course. So you are in Iran right now. You're based in Tehran. And right now, the media is still pushing out these bogus numbers. And it sounds like these protests and even the riots have completely vanished on the ground. Yet media is still pushing this narrative. So can you tell us what exactly is the situation there right now on the ground in Iran?
Things are very quiet, and they've been quiet since Saturday last week. So 9 or 10 days, the last 9 or 10 days have been quiet. Right now, it's late at night after I leave here because I'm at a studio, because our internet connection right now in Iran is only local. We cannot use our personal internet connections to communicate with people outside the country. So I've come here to Press TV, and I'm using their internet connection. So afterwards, I'll go home late at night, and it's very peaceful. I've done this last night, the night before that, and so on. So it's been quite a long while, and the only place where there are riots and protests are online, not in the real world. Now, what happened was that after Netanyahu went to the United States to meet Trump, and they spent the new year together, we had a sudden, I think it was Sunday, maybe 3 weeks ago. I'm not sure about the, I'm not good at dates, but we saw sudden collapse or sudden rapid decline, let's say, to be more accurate, in the Iranian currency. It went down 30 to 40%. And that led to protesters in Tehran, 2,000, 3,000, nothing really big. And they're mostly, I assume, shop owners and business people who are very worried about the fall of the currency because it it's very dangerous for their businesses. There's no police harassment, there were no arrests, and the government said, you are right to be concerned. The next day, there were also protests, I guess roughly more or less the same numbers. But then after that, we saw this sudden influx of very well-trained rioters. And they began to create chaos. So there is a link between Netanyahu's trip to the United States, the currency fall, where the Americans manipulated the currency through Dubai, through the Emirates, through Kurdish areas in northern Iraq, where the Americans and the Israelis have huge influence over the local Kurdish government, and apparently even in Afghanistan. So you had that currency manipulation, then the protests, small protests, quickly infiltrated by people who were obviously well-trained for a very long period of time. And some of them came in from abroad. On Thursday and Friday, we had the height of riots, especially Thursday night, meaning Thursday night last week, like 10 days ago, 11 days ago. And the rioters burned down markets, entire marketplaces, in Rash, for example, private shops. They destroyed clinics. In one clinic, they burned a young nurse. She was burned alive. She was burned alive. She tried to escape. She went up the building, but the entire building caught on fire, and the flames chased her, and ultimately she burned to death. They burned 250 schools and educational centers. They burned down tens of buses in Tehran alone, public buses, tens of fire engines, very expensive cars. Why did they burn the fire engines? Because they didn't want them to put out the fires. Because the whole objective was to create chaos. They murdered, until now, over 300 police officers and volunteers who were policing the streets. So imagine, in the United States, a young woman, she's in her car turning to the right, and then she's shot in the face. And the president and his supporters support it because they're saying that she was not moving to the right enough, basically. And here, they murder at least 300, well over 300. And I think some of those who are injured in hospital, the officers, some of them have died. So it's more than what I thought. So they murdered all these people, yet Western media continues to insist that these are peaceful protesters. Even though, as you rightly pointed out, Pompeo said in his tweet that, he was the former head of the CIA, that the Mossad is on the ground with the rioters. Even though Mossad put out a Persian language statement stating that they're on the ground with the rioters. And even though Channel 14 of the Israeli regime said that a foreign country brought in lots of weapons, and that is why hundreds of Iranian officers of the law and security agents were murdered. So the Israelis are bragging about it. The footage that the Iranians have released so far show it clearly. I've posted quite a bit of them. I didn't have any internet for a few days, but then when I was able to come here and do interviews, I've been using their internet, so I've been tweeting some of these clips. It's clearly very violent, but the West insists that these are peaceful protesters, and I believe that that is a part of the conspiracy. I believe that the meeting between Trump and Netanyahu, and so do people here, that it was about first bringing down the currency, creating riots, and creating an environment to justify war. That's what this was all about. If not to overthrow the state, but they were never even close. So, and then there's another piece of information that's very important. At the height of the riots on Thursday night, and that's when they were the largest in number, the Iranians cut the internet. And within 24 hours, the whole thing collapsed. The whole thing collapsed. On Saturday, there were no riots. A few gatherings here and there, and the police had nothing to do with them. They tried to attack a couple of places, but it was useless. So basically, from Saturday last week onwards, things stopped. Online, they haven't, I know. Now they're saying Iran is using chemical weapons, apparently, online. Tomorrow, they'll be saying they're using nuclear weapons against protesters. But the point is that they pulled the plug and the riots collapsed. Why? Because the riots were never, what's the word in English?
Organic.
Spontaneous. They were never spontaneous.
Yeah.
They were well coordinated across the country. And when they lost communication with abroad, the intelligence agencies that were guiding them, it all fell apart. So, for example, the rioters would be rioting in one part of the city, the police would be there, and then they would be told to move to another part of the city and start something there. And this, by the way, created a lot of chaos in the sense that since the police were overextended, you had organized crime as well. And then people had, like shop owners had to bring in people to protect their shops. So you had the rioters fighting the people who were hired to protect the shops. So the organized crime was, they were very heavily involved in this whole project. But those that weren't, they were on the streets and active. So when they pulled the plug, it all fell apart. So obviously it was not homegrown. It was not. It was very much linked to abroad. And so when they could no longer get orders from abroad, the whole thing collapsed, and now they're being arrested. They also tried to use Elon Musk's capabilities, but that has also been foiled. And the whole thing has collapsed. I mean, as I said, since last Saturday, things have been calm in the country. And also, on Monday last week, a week ago, we had huge pro-Islamic Republic protests across the country, up to 3 million people in Tehran. And it took me a couple of hours, because I went, it took me a couple of hours to get there and a couple of hours to get out. And when I was leaving after the program, people were still trying to get there. It was massive. And then every city had its own gathering. And the places where the riots were more intense, the anti-riot demonstrations were larger. It was quite stunning. But then the West pretends that that didn't happen. And also, I've seen them use footage of these anti-riot rallies in their footage talking about protests. So to summarize, they conspired to bring down the currency. They used the protests, which were peaceful. There's no, on day 1 and 2, if anyone goes back, no one was arrested. There's no footage of the police, like in London, where an old 85-year-old Jewish woman is holding a placard saying, "I'm against genocide," and she goes to jail. We didn't have any of that. Or like in Berlin, where a young German woman would put on a keffiyeh in solidarity with Palestinians and then be battered. We didn't have any of that. The violence began after these small groups, very well-trained groups, who had guns, who had swords, who had they would batter people with you have images of someone using an axe. They, as I said, they cut off people's heads. They burned people alive. And the Western media insists that they were peaceful. And that, I think, is a part of the conspiracy, that they either wanted to see if they could overthrow the state, which they were nowhere close to that. And then, but also they wanted to justify war. And you see people like from AOC, who said we have to help the Iranian people, this fake progressive, to Mark Levin, they're saying basically the same thing. CNN, Fox News, in their own way, in their own language. each, one more bombastic, one more subtle and sophisticated. But I think that what we are seeing is an attempt by Zionists and neocons to prepare the grounds for war. And we are where we are.
It's really hypocritical, just the way the media framing has been towards Iran, considering the fact that in these same moments, federal agents shot Renee Good here in Minneapolis, where I live. And these mass protests have erupted here and they've cracked down with the police brutality. It's been really horrible watching a lot of people on the left, so-called liberals, saying that we need to help the Iranian protesters when maybe they don't even realize because of the propaganda that a lot of these people, like you said, are rioting, and they are openly backed by the state of Israel, and they're receiving weapons and being trained by the CIA and by Israeli Mossad. And, we at Mint Press have documented how Israeli intelligence covertly transfer weapons into Iran through its eastern border, and oftentimes through Israeli-tied cargo ships that travel past Yemen through the Red Sea. We've investigated and revealed that cargo ships like Zodiac Maritime, which is an operator of the Mercer Street, has deep ties to the Israeli military and Israeli intelligence. And they're using these commercial ships to move weapons and operatives for covert operations inside of Iran, including assassination missions. And it's because organic grassroots efforts don't exist to overthrow the government of Iran. It is spontaneous and backed by the West for this regime change operation. And so as we touch on this aspect, I want to hear more about how exactly did the United States and Israel work with Gulf countries and the Kurdish state to manipulate the rial to push for these protests?
Well, I'm not an economist, but basically, since Iran is sanctioned and we have maximum pressure sanctions, and those liberals who pretend to care about Iranians, the United States is waging war against ordinary Iranians. It's been doing that for years. The sanctions are intended to strangle ordinary Iranians. It's intended to make them suffer. Just like these rioters and terrorists that they're supporting in Iran, they're killing Iranians, just as the 12-day war where the U.S. conspired with the Israeli regime to carry out a blitzkrieg attack. These are all human rights violations. These are all acts of murder. And if these liberals have any decency, they would be calling the U.S. government evil. Some of them pretend to be in opposition. They say, yes, we shouldn't carry out war, even though they're evil. Like in the same is true with Venezuela. Maduro is evil, but we shouldn't, no, your government is evil. Your government is evil for murdering 100 people in the Caribbean. Your government is evil for murdering another 100 people in an attack on Venezuela and kidnapping the president and his wife and battering his wife. But they're too cowardly to say this. So these liberals say, yes, Maduro is evil, but we shouldn't do it. That is in self reinforcing the narrative. These people, even when they pretend to be opposed to war, or they may be sincerely opposed to war, by reinforcing this narrative of them being evil and we being somehow normal, they're a part of this murder, death, and destruction. They contribute to the narrative. And the same is true with Iran. In the case of Iran, Iran's only sin is that it is independent. After the revolution, it became independent, and based on its constitution and its religious ideology, it supports the oppressed. And whether it's in Cuba, which is communist, or Venezuela, or South Africa during the apartheid era, or Palestine, Iran has fulfilled that constitutional obligation. And that is why the United States hates Iran so much. That's why Western elites hate Iran so much. If Iran was like Turkey or Saudi Arabia or Egypt or Jordan or the Emirates, there would be no sanctions, there would be no blitzkrieg attack, and there would be no attempts to infiltrate the country with terrorists and rioters and to create death and destruction and chaos. So basically what we have right now is a situation where they are building a consensus to wage war against the country, and Iran is prepared right now to respond. So, but to go back to your question, the since Iran is sanctioned, Iran uses uh, you know alternative means for currency exchange, right? Like I don't know how they would say it in English, but like hawala and like these currency exchanges, they don't use the bank, but they use alternative systems. And so what the Americans, in coordination with their friends and allies, is they shut that, they block it. So Iranians cannot have access to enough dollars. I mean, even though Iran is moving away from the US dollar, it still is using the US dollar too. And so when the Iranians don't have the access to the US dollars that they need, then suddenly the Iranian rial plummets because there's a greater demand for the dollar and there are not enough dollars. And that is what basically happened. So it was a sophisticated operation, but it came right after Netanyahu met Trump. And as I said, right after that, we had the rioters, which were obviously being trained for years, and they were being cultivated. But Mnar, just one final point. Right now, Iran is ready for war. Iran has told the Americans through third parties that if you attack, we will not pull any punches. And that means basically the oil and gas market in the world is going to go haywire because there won't be any more oil from the Caucasus or West Asia. Now, that would bring down the global economy. It would bring down the U.S. economy. Some Americans say, well, the United States is independent when it comes to energy supplies, but that's not true. Ordinary Americans will suffer. In other words, I mean, that's not true in the sense that it will not save the U.S. economy. If the price of oil goes through the roof, then consumers will pay the price. Yes, a few billionaires and oligarchs will make money, but the US economy will collapse just like everywhere else. So the question is, why would Trump do this if it could bring about a global economic depression worse than 1929? Because the people around him are Zionists and Israel first. Their priority is not the US economy, it's not Europe, the European economy, it's not the global economy, it's the Israeli regime. And so we are in a situation right now that we don't know what is going to happen next, but the Iranians know that this is going to be a fight for survival if there's war. And Iran is not going to pull, as I said, Iran is not going to hold back. So those people in the Western media who are lying about peaceful protesters being gunned down by these evil Iranians, this narrative, this ugly and false, fake narrative, they are contributing to war. And they are claiming basically that by attacking Iran and killing people, they're going to be helping the Iranian people. If they want to help the Iranian people, they should end the sanctions. They should stop engaging in war. They should stop supporting terrorists. And by the way, Mnar, these in the West, they say, the Western media is trying to portray these groups as popular in Iran. They're completely discredited. There are four groups. One is the MEK cult. Who are they? During the period when Saddam Hussein invaded Iran in the 1980s, and in 1981, they carried out a military uprising against the state, as Iran was fighting Saddam Hussein, resisting the aggression. Now they're doing the same thing. As Iran is under threat, they are engaging in armed conflict with the state. Then afterwards, they went to Iraq and fought for Saddam Hussein against Iran. Does anyone in their right mind believe that these people who fought for Saddam Hussein against their own country, they have any popularity in Iran? The second group, they're the monarchists, the son of the Shah. who hasn't been in Iran for 50 years. People ridicule him. He's not very smart, and his family issues are, we don't even need to go there. But people ridicule him. But he went to Israel. Israel, which carried out a blitzkrieg war against Iranians, killed 1,000 Iranians, including tens of children. He went there, and he's also calling for Trump to attack Iran. Does anyone in their mind, any sane person, believe that someone who's the son of a former despot who stole billions of dollars from Iranian assets, took it abroad, and is calling for attacks on the country, and who's gone to kiss the ring in Tel Aviv or Al-Quds, that Iranians support him? The third group is ISIS and the Takfiris and the remnants of ISIS. Of course, they're enemies of Iran, and no one supports them. And the fourth are the Kurdish terrorist groups that are based in northern Iraq that are separatists. So Iranians would support, which of these four groups would Iranians support? And these groups are, by the way, very hostile towards one another. But Western intelligence agencies in this operation coordinated all of them. And as I said, when the Iranians pulled the plug, the whole thing fell apart because it was controlled from abroad. But as I said, none of these have any credibility. So we have the mass demonstrations across the country that were shown on live TV. We had rolling coverage on multiple channels. And then RT was here, Al Jazeera was here, Al Mayadeen was here, Turkish journalists were here, CCTV was here, CGTN was here. There were all sorts of people in Tehran, and of course they were taking place across the country, these anti-riot protests. So the Western media, and then, it's extraordinary. When I speak on Western media or when I speak to Western journalists and I tell them that the Israelis and the Americans, they were involved, they try to deny it. Whereas the Israelis are open about it. I tell them, the Israelis beg to differ. And some of these analysts in the West, one of them commented on the Channel 14 tweet, the Channel 14 Israeli news channel that said a country brought in large amounts of weapons and killed hundreds of police officers. One of the, I don't want to name names, but he commented on the tweet and said that basically he was upset that why are the Israelis ruining the peaceful protest narrative? So these Iran experts, these analysts are intellectually dishonest. They're hiding the reality because that's how they get their money. That's how they get their funding. And so mainstream media, these so-called analysts, all of them are part of the same apparatus. And ordinary Americans, I'm sure many of them believe this nonsense, but it's the same thing as Venezuela. But the difference between Iran and Venezuela is Iran is much more powerful, and Iran has powerful allies across the region. In Iraq, in the recent elections, and I'm sure many in your audience know, that Iran's allies won. They did very well in the elections. Iran has strong allies in Yemen. This is not a situation where the Americans can win. Of course, in war, everyone will lose. But the United States will not win, it will lose.
Of course, none of this is possible without the corporate media manufacturing consent for regime change, dehumanizing people on the ground. We're going to go straight into the Kathy Newman clip at Channel 4.
The people on the streets in their thousands who are now being systematically slaughtered in their thousands, they are saying that your government no longer has the right to govern.
Yesterday, we saw rallies across the country, and the footage is online, and it was broadcast live, even though now people like Musk and others are trying to pretend it was AI.
No, these were people who were forced to go out and protest, but people of their own free will bravely went out, and in return, the government, your government, has slaughtered them in their thousands. And for what?
There were 2.3 million people in Tehran yesterday on the streets, and reporters from Al Jazeera English, Arabic, RT, CGTN, CCTV, and others, Al Mayadeen, were there, and they witnessed it. How
Yeah.
can you force
These are
millions of people on the streets in Tehran
because you instill
and other
fear
streets?
into the people of your country. Your government instills fear into the people of your country.
I think that you are living in an alternative universe and you're drowning in your own fake narratives. If you think that the people of Iran support the MEK terror organization or the monarchists that your governments fund and support, I think you really know literally nothing about Iran.
Your government says that 2,000 people are dead. Are you denying that?
Our government never made any statements about any death numbers at all. You're talking
been
about
reported to Reuters.
Our government does not report to Reuters, and Reuters constantly fabricates information about Iran, and it constantly says unnamed sources.
So the bodies piling up on the streets, that's all AI, that's all fake, is it?
There are no bodies piling up on the streets.
No bodies piling up on the streets. We've seen them with our own eyes.
No, not on the streets. I live in Tehran.
Well, in the morgues.
And by the way, so then rephrase and don't produce propaganda. You're supposed to be a credible news outlet. 100 police officers, roughly, or officers of the law were murdered. 2 were burnt alive. 1 was beheaded. And we had a nurse burnt alive in a clinic. The clinic was burnt down and she was burnt. She was a young nurse. We had a 3-year-old kid who was shot by these rioters, or the people who you call protesters.
Okay, Dr. Marandi, I'd love to get your perspective on this media framing and just your experience dealing with these Western corporate media outlets and their utter hypocrisy and bullying of you on their channels.
Well, you know, the thing is that Channel 4 News in the UK is supposedly different from the BBC and Sky News. And when they were preparing for the invasion of Iraq in 2003, the only place where you could hear dissenting voices somewhat louder than in other places was in Channel 4 News. This is the tone of the hosts of Channel 4 News. Every day they've been doing anti-Iranian propaganda. And when they come, and the beginning of the interview, they deleted. They did not put it on YouTube. Even this interview, only parts of it was shown on television, but on YouTube they didn't even show all of it, because the beginning was the worst part of it, where she was, outrageous. But the point is that they've manufactured consent. As I said, when it's on the one hand, you have AOC saying we need to help the Iranians, and then you have Levin. You have the so-called liberals, and you have the conservatives, all saying the same thing. And if anyone is sort of dissenting, they're saying, well, yes, they're evil, but we shouldn't attack. We should use other means. But in reality, they're the ones who are evil. They're the ones who are imposing sanctions. They're the ones who are sending terrorists into the country. They're the ones who fund the Israeli regime. And they're the ones who help the Israelis carry out genocide. And they're the ones who enabled the Israeli regime to carry out a blitzkrieg attack on Iran, and who are threatening Iran with war. So these very same people, liberal and conservative, those in the mainstream, they're all sinister actors. And they all are a part of the problem. They're not a part of the solution. And it's not just Iran. They did the same thing in Venezuela. They justified, even those who were, as I said earlier, those who were supposedly against the war, by demonizing President Maduro, who's infinitely more humane than Trump or Biden or anyone in the US political establishment which has been supporting the Holocaust in Gaza. By demonizing him, they are partners in the crimes against the Venezuelan people because they're too cowardly to tell the truth. And I'm talking about those who have been speaking against war. I don't see any difference between, excuse me for saying this, I don't see any substantial difference between AOC and the Prince of Darkness, Richard Pearl. They're all the same.
And this kind of pushback, I guess you could say, that you're giving Western corporate media is really upsetting a lot of the politicians that may be receiving money from the Israel lobby. And one of those people is, Canadian politician Goldie Gamari. She has actually targeted you specifically. And she recently called you the Joseph Goebbels of Iran and said that once the government is overthrown, they will make sure to kill you like they killed Gaddafi. Her specific quote was, "The tip of your pinky finger will be the biggest piece of you after we Iranians are done with you." And of course, she's a Canadian politician who's also an Iranian of the diaspora. What do you make of such threats? And what do you say about the nature of the portion of Iranian diaspora that are this vicious?
Well, they are reflective of the rioters. In other words, they and the rioters are one and the same. Those rioters have that mentality. People who burn people alive, crush people's heads, murder a nurse, murder a Red Crescent volunteer, murder people who are just walking down the streets. These people are just like her. And it's not just her that threatens us. I mean, just look at my Twitter feed and elsewhere. And they can say it and get away with it. They won't. She said it. She made threats on Piers Morgan's show. I mean, I was invited on Piers Morgan's show. I said I will never go again on the show. Then his producer contacted me. She promised it would be. I mean, I have the exchange on my WhatsApp. She said it will be a one-on-one, and that was my condition. And then he lied, of course, as usual, as he always does, because he has no sense of morality or anything. They did their research on this one. I didn't know who she was. Even now, I don't know her name. You said her name, I knew who you were talking, but I don't know her. And as we speak, I can't remember her name. But they did their research. They know who they bring on the show, because whenever they invite me, it's clear that he has the summaries of all some of my key interviews that I had before being on his show. So he's brief. They know who this woman is. They know what sort of language she uses. They know the sort of threats that she makes. And then on the show, she made threats on live TV, and on a recorded program. And then hours later, they broadcast. They didn't remove it. And she does those tweets that you point out, and on social media, and no one touched them until a well-known, a very well-known online activist or media person, Glenn Greenwald, he tweeted, and then they afterwards, when this became a big thing, they restricted views of her tweet only because of that. So the same, I mean, if I were to say anything like that, imagine what they would have done to me. Imagine they would have taken my account away from me. I would have been condemned across the board by social media activists, and rightly so. But these people can say whatever they want because they've dehumanized the Iranians so much. And as I said, the whole political establishment is a part of this. They're all criminals. Just like, Mnar, anyone who trusts Western media and Western elites and Western pundits after Gaza and believes that they're credible about Iran or Venezuela, these people are useless. I mean, they're irredeemable. They're too naive. They're too ignorant to be able to change them. It's clear as day. For well over 2 years, they've been trying to hide a Holocaust, and they've been apologists for the Israeli regime. Remember the October the 7th rapes and the beheadings, months after it was clear that these were lies, they continued to push it. People like Piers Morgan, among many others, they continued to push it because they wanted to justify the Holocaust. They were lying. There was no evidence. We all know that now. So anything you hear about Iran from these people is obviously of the same nature. Iran is being punished because of its position on Palestine, because it is only Iran that supports the Palestinian people. The Iranians and the Yemenis and the Axis of Resistance. No one else does. Everyone else does business. Like Erdogan, like Abdullah in Jordan, like Sisi in Egypt, like Mohammed bin Zayed. All of these people do business with the Israeli regime. They can say a few nasty words here and there, but they're fine. But Iran is because of its support for the Palestinian people. So yes, if you believe the nonsense about Gaza being a war and not a genocide, then you can believe all the nonsense by Western media and Western pundits and Western governments about Iran.
Of course, and I mean, you kind of have to be a special kind of stupid, honestly, at this point, if you believe anything that comes out of Western corporate media about any nation that dares to stand up to US and Israeli imperialism. Like you said, we witnessed over 2 years of atrocity propaganda being pushed within Western corporate media, from the beheaded babies to, you know, these rape claims to babies being baked in ovens. We saw how media manufacture consent, how they push bogus claims and atrocity propaganda to justify war. And yet we have many of the same people who saw that say, oh, but, you know, Iran is different. Or they are sharing a lot of these statistics and these numbers of mass arrests and mass casualties.
20,000 killed, chemical weapons being used. I mean, just give them a few more days and it'll be 200,000 people killed and nuclear weapons used.
I mean, we literally just heard that about, you know, Palestine, and they're parroting the same thing. And a lot of it has to do with a lot of the Iranophobia and the Shia phobia and just the total dehumanization of Iran over the course of the past, you know, decades. And it has even touched the Palestinian American community. It has touched a lot of the Arab and Muslim community here in the West, because even sometimes Al Jazeera pushes sometimes these narratives about Iran and nuclear weapons. So it's very clear that there's an agenda to push for this regime change, and it's through dehumanization of Iran. And I want to talk about the timing of all of this. And this is, you know, one of my final questions for you, because it's really important. Because right before Nicolas Maduro was kidnapped, and right before you know, these Iranian protests were hijacked, and right before Trump announced that he's ready to invade Greenland to take over the minerals there, of course, all of these things, the Trump administration is openly saying what they're trying to do. There were closed door meetings between President Trump and Netanyahu, and everything that I just mentioned basically happened right after that. Do you agree?
Oh yes, yes, and you're absolutely correct. This phobia against Iran and Shia, it's something that Western media has been doing for decades, and the media empires of these family dictatorships in the Persian Gulf, whether in Qatar or Saudi Arabia or the Emirates and others, they've been doing it for decades. And you know, Qatar is a Wahhabi regime. Its central mosque is the Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab Mosque, which is Takfiri ideology that he pushed. And of course, Erdogan and Qatar, they've been supporting ISIS and Al-Qaeda for a very long period of time, sadly. Turkey, especially being a strong Sufi, you know, having a strong Sufi tradition, Erdogan is trying to push it in a very different direction. So this sectarianism under the umbrella of the American empire and this general hostility towards Iran in the Western media, all of these together, the Arabic and the oil and gas funded Arabic media and the Western media, because they're all in the same camp. they're all in it together. Remember, after the fake ceasefire, when all these world leaders gathered in Egypt for that monkey show, they all went there basically to whitewash Trump and his atrocities in Gaza. And I don't want to go into each and every one of them, but Iran was not there. If Iran went there, and Trump would have been very pleased, but Iran was not going to whitewash his crimes. So they're all in the same camp, and it's the axis of resistance. That is why they're targeting Iran today, because Iran is at the heart of the axis of resistance. And that is why we've had this anti-Iranian narrative for decades, or anti-Shia narrative for decades, or anti-resistance narrative for decades. And the current conspiracy that's playing out, it began over the new year with Netanyahu and Trump meeting in Mar-a-Lago in Florida. That's, immediately afterwards, all these events started. And these pre-planned riots, these people who've been trained for a very long period of time, they were deployed subsequently. And we may have a full-scale war in the coming days. Who knows? And the Western media is desperately trying to prepare the grounds for such a war. But it's not going to end well for them. And when we have the economic crisis, the oil and gas crisis, the energy crisis, I think a lot of people whose lives will be ruined will be seeking out these people who've been pushing for the war, including Trump's opponents, who are also pushing for war. As I said, even those who are speaking against the war, they're justifying it by demonizing Iran. The same thing that they did with President Maduro and the Venezuelans.
And we have news sources like Iran International, which is funded by Saudi Arabia and directed a lot of its coverage by Saudi intelligence. And they're pushing this dehumanization of Iranians and pushing this Shia phobia. What do you make of Iran International?
Well, Iran International is based in London. And I've actually recently tweeted a clip from what one of the hosts was saying. He was saying that we have to have armed rebellion in Iran. He was advocating it. But Ofcom in the UK is not banning the channel for this. This is something that would cause any other media channel to be shut down. Press TV, RT, all sorts of Lebanese and Yemeni and Iraqi media channels and all Iranian media channels have been banned in the West and sanctioned for just opposing Western narratives. None of them have called for armed rebellion in the UK or the US. But so the US government and the UK government, because they have offices in the US, UK, and in Tel Aviv, they are openly advocating they're openly telling people to wage war against the government in Iran. I don't know who funds. I don't know if the Saudis still fund it. They were funding it in the past. Some say that it's sort of been Saudis cut funding and the Israelis have replaced them. I don't know the details, but it is a terrorist entity, and Iran International is pushing for war, and it is pro-Zionist, and it wants to see Iran bombed, and they are day and night trying to create fear and division in Iraq, and it's very ugly in Iran, and it is very ugly, and it's not just Iran International. The West spends billions of dollars a year on anti-Iranian propaganda in Persian. There are, I think, 200 to 300 TV channels. We don't have 1/10 of that inside Iran. They have all sorts of websites. They have Telegram channels. They have a numerous troll farms. One in Albania has 2,000 to 3,000 people working in it. This is all funded by American taxpayers and others. So you have bots. So this is a huge media campaign. And then on the other hand, they shut down voices in Iran. I've lost my Instagram account a long time ago. My Facebook account. I only have X, and it's clear I'm heavily shadow banned. People say that many people have told me that. So, and many people have lost their accounts, and many young people in Iran are fearful of tweeting because they're thinking about continuing their education abroad, and they know that their accounts are going to be checked in Western countries. So they shut down accounts, they sanction people, they sanction media outlets in our part of the world. They try to silence our voices, and they try to amplify anti-Iranian voices as much as possible.
And one last point I want to talk about is the targeting of women in Iran, women's rights. Just a short story. Many of the Iranian diaspora that I meet when I talk to them about Iran, the first thing they mention is we are not free in Iran as women because we have to wear the hijab. And that's literally the single most point that they mention. Everything else about women working, being represented in government, and so forth is very positive for them. But the fact that Iran has the hijab mandate is, a point that they always press about Iranian women's rights. But we also have to remember, and so they want that mandate to be removed from these are from the Iranian diaspora women that I meet often, and they really, really admire Western capitalism. That's also something that I find that they want. They want McDonald's in Iran. They want Western capitalism in Iran. They want Starbucks. They want all the corporations in Iran, and they want to openly work with the US. They want to work with Israel. And they kind of have this kind of rose shade, colored glasses on about working with the United States and Israel and what that would mean for Iran. And when I mention how a lot of these, women life freedom hashtags are being signal boosted literally inside of Tel Aviv, this is something that we've documented and analyzed from literally Google Analytics and X. A lot of these hashtags are being signal boosted by the West and Israel to manipulate the Iranian woman in the diaspora. They're completely in denial about this. So I don't know. I wanted to kind of talk about this because it's a sensitive topic and people don't truly understand in the West this issue. But I was hoping to maybe get your perspective on this.
Well, first of all, the millions of people who went to the streets in Tehran, and the millions of others who went to the streets in different other cities, at least I suppose half of them were women. So obviously those women don't agree with the narratives that are produced in the West. Also, many of these Iranians living in the United States, many of them have never been to Iran for decades. And many of them are influenced by Western narratives. They don't live in Iran, and they're influenced. When they're bombarded day and night by these narratives, they too are influenced. And also, and you know this better than most, if you are against Western narratives, life does not become easy for you in the United States. And for someone who has Iranian roots, who just wants to be left alone and live a private life, they would consider often the smart thing to do would just be to mimic what they're being told. And so they're conditioned, many, to think that way. Of course, many in the Iranian diaspora don't think that way. I've been to different communities. I've been to Iranian restaurants. I've met many Iranians abroad. Some of them know me because I've been on media, and I've never had any problems. I've never been, that's not really necessarily the case for most people in the diaspora. And we have to also keep in mind that there are thousands of Iranians or former Iranians or Iranian Americans and in Europe who they have jobs that are linked to the United States government. All those Persian media channels, they hire Iranians. All those troll farms, all those, there are Iranians who are involved. So a lot of people have a vested interest in these, they're part of this industry. But in any case, inside Iran, I think I may have told you this once before on your show. I've been an academic at the University of Tehran for, for almost 23 years now. Actually, literally for almost 23 years now. And in a couple of weeks, it'll be 23 years. And during these 23 years, one woman or another, in 19 of those 23 years, one woman or another, no, yes, 19 of those 23 years, one woman or another was my boss at the University of Tehran. The dean of my faculty has been one female professor or another. This is one of the elite universities in the country. Most of the majority, I'm not saying the whole university, but I'm affiliated to 2 departments. One in the, so in both departments and 2 different faculties that I'm affiliated to, one is I'm a part of, the other one I'm an affiliate member. One is my own department. The majority of the academics who've been hired over the last, let's say, decade or half a decade, 7-8 years, are women. So this is really nonsense. In Iran, yes, there are dress codes, which are very loosely enforced. You'll see women on campus or on the streets not wearing the hijab. But the idea behind the dress code, which is for men and women, is they do not want women to be sexualized or commodified or objectified. Now, someone in the United States or in the West may disagree with that, and some Iranians may disagree with that. But that's a debate that Iranians have, and Iranians debate that. If you go in any taxi in Iran, if you spend a few days in Iran and take a bus or take the metro or take taxis and go around, people in Iran talk. They're not like in some Western countries where everyone is quiet. They talk. And they speak against the government, they'll speak against the leader, they'll speak against the president, they'll speak against religion. You'll find everything. But remember, those millions of people who went to the streets, these are the same bus drivers or taxi drivers or people in the metro that may be attacking the government. But that doesn't mean that they're against the state. That doesn't mean they're against the Constitution. And I insist that among all of its neighbors in this region, Iran is the most open of them all, contrary to the Western narratives, despite the sanctions, despite the constant attempts to create division. I mean, Western governments which pretend to support multiculturalism, inside Iran, they try to turn one sect against another, one ethnic group against another. They're doing it all the time. That's what their intelligence agencies do. That's their objective. And it's, of course, true across the region, between Shia and Sunni, Arab and Persian, or, I don't know, Muslim and Christian. That's what they've been doing for centuries. And as the empire declines, they become more brutal in this respect because they have less power. So they rely more on division and the attempt to turn people against one another.
Of course, and we have to remember that in Iran, I mean, there are more women in parliament than most Western countries. I think Iran has the highest number of.
We have women pilots. We have women taxi drivers. We have women. We have women in the cabinet. We have them in parliament. They're everywhere. I'm not saying Iran is some utopia, but it is definitely not the dystopia that they say it is in Western media. It's a normal society.
Yeah.
And people in Iran, when millions come to the streets in Tehran, which is the most secular city in this country, that shows that it has popular support and that Western narratives are false. And after Gaza, no one should trust Western narratives. So, you've mutual friends of ours, Max Blumenthal, George Galloway, many people visited Tehran and Iran in recent months. Anyone can ask them, is it what it is said in the West? No. Western mainstream media is controlled by the same oligarchs that control Western political parties, and anything that they say is agenda driven, and people should be very careful about them.
Of course. And the people that are in the diaspora can't rely on big tech billionaires like Elon Musk and his Starlink to save them. These are the billionaires that have exploited people to make their billions, and their agenda is very clear in their AI pursuit. So, Dr. Marandi,
they don't care about Americans just as they don't care about Iranians.
Of course. Dr. Marandi, I really appreciate you being here today to dismantle the anti-Iran propaganda used to manufacture consent for war and regime change against your country. And I applaud you for being so steadfast, standing so strong against the winds of these horrible propagandists in Western corporate media and dismantling their narrative. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all the fantastic work that you do. And I also thank your audience, because I know they are steadfast people who see beyond the propaganda, thanks to people like yourself.
Thank you.